Hi, I am back. Probably not by popular demand, but personal fiat at least. And today I'm going to cover a property that has been near and dear to me for many years. And it has recently reached another medium, and by many accounts has been a failure in that medium, but not by my account. And of course, this was a property that was, it's been lambasted, denounced, slagged off, ignored, mishandled in its original medium, which is comic books, for most of the nearly 50 years that it's been extant. So I'm going to try to do better on the sound on this one. I did a video on this topic and the sound was unusable. So I have a little bit of appropriately occultish music playing in the background. So I am hoping that that won't cut into the sound too much, because I know it tends to do that. So I'm going to kind of try to speak as closely to the speakers as possible. Still not a webcam expert, but a year or so, a year or so. Yeah, this month it'll be a year since I've done this full time. So I'm still learning, but I have come a little way, if not a long way. So without more ado, the subject, this will probably be the header for the video. It's going to be in defense of Hellstrom, the show and the comic. And first I'm going to go through the history of the comic and also talk about, what I like about it, what it means to me, and then I'm going to talk about the recent, now canceled Hulu TV series that Marvel produced, that has been disowned by Marvel and almost universally slagged by critics, but which I really loved, and I'm going to explain why I loved it, and I'm going to explain why it succeeds as an adaptation. Yes, we've been down this road before. That's a metric I use in these kind of cases. So, in 1973, Marvel had some success with some supernatural or occult-themed comic book heroes or characters. Man-Thing was notably one of the earliest in Savage Tales #1. He got his own series. And then in Marvel Spotlight #5, we're introduced to this critter called the Ghost Rider, which took the name from an old Marvel Western character, but is updated. Instead of a Phantom Horseman, he was a modern-day leather-clad biker with a halo of hellfire and a skull for a head. And he was just a fucking cool-looking character. Obviously, he's endured all these decades. The basic visual is very strong. The concept has changed a little, but not much. It's kind of come full circle a number of times. The kind of dreadful Mark Steven Johnson live-action Ghost Rider film from the 2000s starring Nicolas Cage as Johnny Blaze, the Ghost Rider. One thing it did correctly was that it did kind of make it clear that, yes, Johnny Blaze did sell his soul to the devil. They call him Mephistopheles in the film. He's played by Peter Fonda, which I thought was kind of cool casting. One of the only things I liked about the film. But that's part of the mythology of what I'm talking about right now, because Ghost Rider was the first comic book series in Marvel Comics to actually depict Satan himself as a character in his own right, on camera. Though you rarely saw his actual visage, which is appropriate, and I think that was a very effective and wise choice. It increased the mystery. The original artist on Ghost Rider was Mike Ploog. Mike Ploog had already been working on Werewolf by Night, the aforementioned Man-Thing, and he was to work on Monster of Frankenstein around the same time as well. So he kind of had the whole Marvel monster thing pretty wrapped up. His style was it was very idiosyncratic. It was very early 70s. It looked very counterculture. His drawing was very similar in style to that of his mentor, Will Eisner. And no one else in Marvel was drawing like that at the time. And I take immense pleasure from watching I have the TV with the music on here. From reading those books, from beholding his artwork from that period. I never get tired of it. It's just some of the best cartooning I've seen in mainstream American comics. So, and I was weaned on it. So even though I wasn't a huge aficionado of the art style of Mike Ploog in that era per se, I did acquire the third issue of the Ghost Rider series in Marvel Spotlight 7. My mom bought it for me. I don't know what she was thinking. Again, she always had a good instinct for what I wanted, or I had a good instinct for things that I'd be interested in. They were like calling out to me, these covers, when I would exhaust the month's issues of the mainstream heroes that I collected, though I didn't really collect back then yet. I was a little too young. But, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Captain America, Avengers, I would, occasionally gravitate toward the odd titles. And if we were sold out of the other ones, my mom would be like, well, what about this one? And that's how I got my first issue of Conan. I didn't know what to make of that one. And that is how I got my first Ghost Rider. And later, stuff like Man-Thing and Amazing Adventures with War of the Worlds and Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu. And I never collected at the time more than those single issues that I bought of these series. So Ghost Rider appealed to me the most because he was kind of most like a superhero. But that first issue I bought was really kind of creepy. And, I was extremely young. I couldn't read. And the imagery, my mom told me that the character was Satan. She read me a few passages. This was before her Born Again era. In the 80s, where she kind of got suckered in by televangelists, like so many people did, and went on that bandwagon, and thus became a much less loving and accepting and liberal-minded person that she was in the 1970s. She was more of an intellectual then, and she read a lot of books, and she even read some horror and sex books, later things that she would throw away because they were evil. She had The Exorcist. I never read it. I did read some of her sex books when I was young, though, I admit. So, spinning out of that era's fascination with Satanism and the occult and the Satanic Church with Anton LaVey and all those kind of hijinks that were part of this kind of dawning of a new consciousness, we were hoping. I mean, I was too young, too, but, what is now the baby boomer generation was hoping that the age of Aquarius or age of Horus would usher in some enlightenment, some freedom of thought. Humanity would kind of hopefully advance beyond war and killing and save the environment and eventually plant our seeds in the stars, as Timothy Leary suggested. All that was just, to me, that's the greatest experiment in human history, maybe maybe more so than the Enlightenment. But it climaxed, and it seems like it's been kind of downhill since then. Call me a cynic or maybe a realist, but I still hold a lot of those values, and I still enjoy the art and thought of that period, that awakening period from, I'm going to say, roughly 1967 to 1977-ish. On either side, I was just a small child. I wasn't around for the beginning of it, but comics drew my attention when I was about 1.5 years old. I pointed to a Spider-Man comic, and my mom bought it for me. I didn't know what it was. What was the appeal? I don't know, but it's a lifelong affair, as I've discussed on here before. So in this Ghost Rider book, he sells his soul. Johnny Blaze, the motorcyclist, sells the soul for Satan. I'm queuing up my occult music in the background over here, pardon me. And he becomes the Ghost Rider, and at night he has to walk the earth in this form. This concept was created by Roy Thomas, who of course was ascending to editor in chief at that time, replacing Stan Lee, who went to publisher. And Roy developed, conceived a ton of characters in comics during that period, many of which now are emerging in television shows and films. Roy is the mind behind not only Daimon Hellstrom, who we're going to discuss here in a second, but also, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Killraven, Warlock, the refurbished Captain Marvel, probably forgetting 8,000 others. He brought Conan to comic books and popularized Conan. He brought Star Wars to comic books before the film was even out. He wrote great runs on quite a number of books, especially a 10-year run on Conan, and he had already done a 6-year run on Avengers. But as editor-in-chief, he shepherded these lines. Like I said, had the initial brainstorm for a lot of these ideas, and then other people developed them, co-developed with him, co-designed them. So, Ghost Rider was, I interviewed Roy Thomas in 1997. Sorry. I first met him in 1992 at Heroes Con here in Charlotte. That was a dream come true. Over the next few years, I encountered him at cons, and he signed a good number of books for me. In 1997, I worked for a paper called Indie File. It was regionally published. And I interviewed Roy on the phone for a few hours and culled it into this one interview that the editor, laid out to where, I don't know, it's like 4-point font. Or it was just horrible. To him, if it was crowding out the ads, then it was just too long, man. So, Roy and I continued to talk at conventions and even correspond a little. We traded some books a couple of times. Last time I saw him was 2014. But anyway, he's a great guy, and I got to ask him between that interview and just over the years in general. For instance, the first time I met him in 1992, I picked his brain for 3 or 4 hours. And at that time, his career was kind of on a lull because he was segueing from his long run at DC back to Marvel, and didn't really have much of a following anymore in the 90s, his style of writing. But eventually, due to a lot of projects and his profile being raised by having had so much influence in the industry, he's much more well known now, and rightfully so. Yeah, he created the Vision and Ultron, and made up the origin of the Black Panther. There's tons of things this guy's done that are just amazing, that are enduring. So, one book that Stan Lee suggested, was a book about Satan called The Mark of Satan. And Roy was like, no, I don't know if that sits well with me, Stan, but it's kind of radical. I assume he wanted it to be a black and white horror magazine, like Savage Tales. So Roy kind of took command of the idea and kind of sketched out some basic ideas, concept. He turned it over to Gary Friedrich, a staff writer at the time, who was starting to get more work. And Friedrich physically designed the entire character by himself, as he had Ghost Rider. They obligatorily give co-creator credits to things now, like in materials online, or the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, or in the credits of the television series that Marvel does. But the real credits sometimes are a little bit different of who did what. Sometimes it's hard to discern. In this case, despite Mike Ploog getting some co-credit for Ghost Rider, pretty much Friedrich designed, based on Roy's idea, he created and designed him by himself. And then same thing with Son of Satan. That's what the book finally came to be called. But there wasn't a book then. It was going to be launched as a character within the pages of Ghost Rider. Ghost Rider was struggling against good old Satan in every issue. Early 70s, Eisnerish art, bikers, Satan, it was the same kind of crazy milieu that Ploog masterfully pulled off with Steve Gerber and Man Thing. Like I said, at the time, I was kind of oblivious to all that. It's too young and too whatever. Uh, but I was curious. So uh, I didn't actually buy a Son of Satan issue until later. What happened is in Marvel Spotlight 12 and 13, there's a storyline in which Ghost Rider is once again battling Satan and a villainess called the Witch Woman. And let me see if I can find kind of book around here. Seems to be eluding me now. I'm probably sitting on top of it. Well, anyway, there's a Marvel Horror Essential Collection. They were doing those in the 2000s, and the Marvel Horror one collects all of the Son of Satan vintage stories as well as the Satana stories. We'll get to her, and it begins with the Marvel Spotlight two-parter where Daimon Hellstrom is introduced. So when he's introduced, he's like a former seminary student. I guess he's kind of coming off of that. He's kind of given up hope because he's found his mother's diary at Fire Lake in Massachusetts, and he inherits the estate, and he learns from the diaries that his father is Satan. And his sister, they don't mention his sister at the time, but later that becomes worked into the origin. So Daimon was also an exorcist. He even taught. I'm going to look for this book because no, I'm not sure what I did with it. Okay, let me put you on pause 1 second. Are we rolling? Okay. So this is the Marvel Horror volume I have. You have Son of Satan on the cover and Satana Hellstrom on the back cover. Son of Satan, you can't really see too well, is on the inside, and I think I had an issue that Gary Friedrich signed for me, but I sold that copy. So yes, they even have the book. Well, this particular one begins in, yes, Ghost Rider 1 and 2. So I guess I may have these in the wrong order. It was continuing out of Marvel Spotlight 11. So he began his own book with art by Tom Sutton and Sid Shores, really nice art. And that's when Daimon was introduced. So it's a guy, he's kind of standing at a graveyard, and the grave belongs to Victoria Hellstrom, born March 4th, Pisces, 1928, died August 21st, 1953. He places a gold cross on her grave. And then we get into Ghost Rider fighting the aforementioned Witch Woman. And then this mysterious character kind of appears on and off here. Well, it's a crossover into Marvel Spotlight 12, yes. So in Marvel Spotlight 12, the character who has been kind of skulking about and for a while was imprisoned. He imprisoned himself in the shack and with these ankhs around his wrists, and he's trying to help these people involved with the Witch Woman scenario because he's an exorcist, but you still never see his face completely revealed. So the first full reveal is it goes right into Marvel Spotlight number 12. I don't know if you can see this, maybe not. Incredible Herb Trimpe cover. Early Herb Trimpe art that was very Jack Davis influenced, very fine stuff, inked by Frank Chiaramonte. And, there's all kinds of crazy stuff in here. Wish this was in color. But yeah, there's the Hellborn chariot here with his 3 horses, Hecate. I forgot the other 2, Asmodeus and the other one. But anyway, he was a very cool character, a very sinister looking character, and he takes on his father's legions in hell. So what we've learned now is that he's of age and he's learned his heritage, and he's going to use his training as a seminary student and as an exorcist to battle his own father and the powers of darkness and resist the dark spirit within him. So that's kind of how it goes. From there on, he gets his own series. The first one I purchased was the 3rd in the series, number 14. My mom purchased this for me when it was coming out. I didn't know who Satan was. I said the son of Satan. My mom corrected me to Satan. Something like years later, she would, I'm sure, regret. This was when Steve Gerber took over as writer and did a wonderful run, along with the great art of Jim Mooney, one of Gerber's best collaborators. So that's enough diving into that. Well, I may show you some panels of one other story, but we'll get to that later. So that's the setup. So he had a few supporting characters like Dr. Catherine Reynolds and a Wiccan woman named Serapha Thames, who became kind of a love interest. He just battled various different kinds of demons. He dealt with some tarot readers and did some exorcisms, and it's filtered through Steve Gerber's just amazing consciousness. Did a crossover with ancient Atlantis, which Gerber was using that mythology in his run on Submariner and on Man Thing through this sorceress called Zerad Na, who had been a prophet of the end of Atlantis. But no one, of course, no one listened to her. So that was his series in Marvel Spotlight. Then he got his own book. So I have some of these. So we can throw a little splash of color in here. We don't have to resort to the black and white. I've been remiss in forgetting that I dragged out much better visual aids because I have a nice collection, not complete. So this is Son of Satan, his first series issue, Marvel Spotlight number 12. So now you can kind of see him in color with his 3 horses and his chariot. Then number 13, dramatic John Romita cover. This is kind of an iconic image of Daimon. This one was the first one I got. Like I said, the first one done by Gerber Mooney, and it's really beat up. It's been a much loved copy. I never upgraded, and I'm not selling these, by the way. I am selling most, well, not most, but about half my comic book collection currently. A lot of them are on eBay. Please check them out. The link will be below. So as you see, I have several of these. This is one where he battles a creature named Spyros, who is kind of crucified in this other dimension, and it turns out he's actually Adam from the Bible, and he's been abandoned by God and become demonic. And then there's a tarot issue, Death is in the Cards. There's some classic stuff here. The last issue, number 8, has a great Ernie Chan cover, also an iconic image. And this one had Russ Heath art, and this was a fill-in issue, and John Warner was writing the series called Son of Satan. He had taken over from Gerber, and he was great too. That last issue was a very strange issue, kind of in the mindscape of Daimon Hellstrom, and the really art-driven and just beautiful, lush artwork, which I wish I could show you, but you can definitely Google it. Son of Satan 8. Okay, so let me catch you up with what's going on in a minute later on, later. So his book was canceled, and he became a character in. He'd already joined the Defenders via Steve Gerber, a great comic book superhero group, very quirky that Gerber did, very groundbreaking. Had a big influence, whether consciously or subconsciously, but I would say consciously, on Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol, and hence on the Doom Patrol TV series. A lot of issues of Morrison's Doom Patrol had similar kinds of arcs and tangents and non sequiturs and dramatic endings, but still rendered in a semi-superheroish style by Richard Case. It was very reminiscent of Gerber's work with Saul Buscema and Klaus Janson on the Oregon Defenders. So Hellstrom had become a Defender kind of by default because they're a non-team with no charter. Anyone who fights alongside them can become a member. So there have been a lot of Defenders in the old iteration of the Defenders. But suffice to say, he didn't stick around. But later when J.M. DeMatteis took over Defenders and wanted to kind of emulate Gerber's work while also applying this kind of weird hippy-dippy philosophy to it, and that's not a slag, that's just where DeMatteis was coming from at the time. His style of writing later altered a bit, but during that period he was doing a comic book called Moonshadow with beautiful painted artwork, and his stuff was very steeped in the 60s, 70s kind of mysticism and spirituality. He did a great Doctor Strange graphic novel with beautiful painted art by Dan Green, who inked X-Men for years, but who knew he was just a great painter in his own right. Um, and within the Defenders, DeMatteis's Defenders, Daimon became center stage, became kind of like a romantic anti-hero, tormented, wanting to divest himself of his, what he called the dark soul, the other kind of part of him, that he could never relinquish, that made him, he was of human flesh and also of hell. So during this period, I'd already liked the character a lot, as done by Gerber. And as I was getting a little older into my teens, early teens, I loved Son of Satan. I loved the whole arc. He fell in love with Patsy Walker, also known as Hellcat, who also has been depicted now in live action Marvel shows, in the Jessica Jones Netflix series. Though she never actually used the name Hellcat, she did, become a vigilante and use the powers. So, yeah, that was a great love of mine, that comic book and all the stories, and quite especially that love story. I'm a sucker for that romantic kind of thing after being weaned on soap operas, and honestly, that was a big part of a big subcurrent or undercurrent, or maybe even overtone of Stan Lee's books and Roy Thomas's as when they were editors for Marvel. Huge influence on me, as anyone who ever will hear about Flicker Street will know that relationships are a big part of my art, my writing, my fiction, and have been a big part of my life for great good and great ill, I must say. So, as some of you unfortunately had to labor through in these videos learning about. So their story did have a happy ending, and through an interesting set of circumstances, the dark soul was cast out of Daimon and into a serpent who crawled away. And Daimon and Patsy married, and Daimon was always a very composed, eloquent, erudite, intellectual individual. He was pretty young, his early to mid 20s, I guess by this time when Marvel was still sort of aging in real time. By that time by the time the Defenders story wrapped up, he was probably in his very early 30s. It's very perfect, and of course Patsy was supposed to be several years younger than him. An interesting side note is at the time I was watching a soap opera called The Guiding Light, and there was a very urbane archaeologist character named Quentin Armacord, played by Michael Tylo, and he reminded me quite a lot of Daimon Hellstrom during that same period. And he also was in love with a much younger and kind of ditzy character named Nola, and he also was fighting his past, his dark past, and all these secrets. So I was grooving on these, and I will say that period strongly informed my character Clive Dharma, the Black Cabal, in Flicker Street, who is still one of the probably 5 most important characters, on screen in my story. He's survived death. I should say he's cheated death. He never really officially died. So my characters die, 90% of the time they stay completely dead. None of this Marvel-like shenanigans. So, huge influence on me. And during that period, like I said, my mom was a born-again acolyte, and she listened to this loathsome television show. This loathsome radio show. No televangelist, is a radio evangelist called Bob Larson. He had a strange voice. He was like, "This is Bob Larson." Very obnoxious motherfucker. I'm just going to put it out there. He really was. Very judgmental, very fucked up. And he did an episode on comic books. And it was right in this period. And I was, I guess, in junior high, maybe. Yeah, God, early junior high. And I said, "Mommy, I'm going to call this guy." Yes, I still call my mom Mommy at that age. So what? Anyway, I was like, I'm going to call this guy and tell him what, how things are, because even back then I was pedantic about the accuracy of facts pertaining to the geekish things I was obsessed with. Um, but, you know, I didn't think I'd get through, but I did call, and I finally did get through. And I talked to Bub Larson, and he was like, he heard me out a little. I said, Son of Satan uh, is a great character. Even in his current story, he's reaching for redemption. He can't help that he's the son of Satan. He was studying to be a priest. He's an exorcist. He's a dichotomy of good and evil. And I'm pretty sure I did use the word dichotomy on the radio. And Larson heard me out a little, and then he started squirming, getting really uncomfortable, and argued against me that there was no place for this kind of thing in comic books. It was a horrid thing to do to children. He didn't yell at me. He didn't get nasty. I'll give him that. He did it with quite a few callers. Maybe because I sounded young. I don't know. But it went better than I could have expected. I think I kind of briefly, quickly had my say. I'm not saying it opened up any minds and, to some, hardcore, spirit-filled, born-again folks. I'm going to check out those Defenders comics with that son of Satan. I doubt that ever happened. But if it did, I'm very proud that I made that happen. Anyway, so they wrote Daimon out of the Defenders. He no longer had the dark soul within him. This was a period where editor Jim Shooter was kind of demystifying the Marvel line. He didn't really like these supernatural and surrealistic kind of books. By this time, Jim Starlin, Steve Gerber, Steve Englehart, Doug Minch, Don McGregor, all the lofty, cosmic, philosophical, deep, heavy Marvel writers of the 70s were gone. They were all doing nice work for DC and elsewhere. Because Shooter was a cocksucker. I'm just going to put it out there. I know a couple of people, not people I transact with regularly any longer. I know a couple of people who really like Shooter a lot, love his work, and I like a little bit of his early Avengers work and a little bit of his early Legion of Superheroes work. But as an editor, no. As a person, no. And these people like him as a person too. And Gene Colan's just about my favorite comic book artist. And anybody who slams off Gene Colan and put him through the anxiety he did over his artwork being not, up to the mediocre, as Shooter put it, at least mediocre quality, because he wanted to eliminate all the uneven quality and people missing deadlines. So he's like, we're going to get the whole line up to at least a uniform mediocrity. And he did. To his credit, he did let Frank Miller and a couple other people bust out and be idiosyncratic during that period. They were his favorite. He let Sienkiewicz also, but mostly he shoehorned people into doing just dreadful books, and a lot of them were inked by just a couple of inkers who made them all look the same, a certain sameness to the line. So 80s Marvel, as it waned, it was dreadful. I still eagerly collected them though. I had my favorite characters. I followed the characters over the artists back then. With the movies now, and my MCU, I follow the characters. I believe, I admit, but I follow artists and creators more than characters. And if you are a fan of an artist who owns their own material, they're going to have indelible characters because they're going to own them. They're going to have a stake in them. They're going to believe in them. They're going to know them inside out. And they're not going to get a committee of corporate jackoffs telling them how this guy should act when 50% of the readership has a better idea than those hacks because they've been reading it for 20 years. So, and the same thing is, invariably happened with comic books. Any long-term serial fiction where it's changed hands and the characters are properties of corporate entities, I'm totally against that model. It has given me a lot of joy. Its work in the early days because, it was as good as the people it allowed to create. But after I saw what it did to those people, how it ground down people who didn't own their own work, such as Siegel and Schuster and Jack Kirby, and Steve Gerber, and Marv Wolfman, and we could go on and on. You know, just fuck all that. So where does that leave a character like Son of Satan? Well, since Shooter depowered or killed off almost all, if not all, of the monster characters like Morbius, Dracula, Son of Satan, uh, you know, a bunch of books, and he canceled he canceled Defenders, he canceled Power Man, Iron Fist. You know, it's like it's time to just clean house and get rid of all those cool '70s characters. Fuck this, and you know, let's concentrate on the X-Men and the big guys from the '60s, the Secret Wars. So yeah. You see where that got us in the '90s with Rob Liefeld and company. And that's where we come to the next iteration of Son of Satan. Steve Englehart had returned to Marvel and was doing some pretty good work on West Coast Avengers. It was entertaining, very continuity driven and character driven. The art was by Al Milgrom and Joe Sinnott. Now, Al Milgrom had done some fun and dynamic art, writing on the coattails of Jim Starlin in the early '70s as his inker, and then later as his fill-in uh, with Englehart as writer on Captain Marvel. That's a great run. The Starlin run and the Englehart Milgrom run. Milgrom's shortcomings were made up for by really good inkers. Joe Sinnott is a strong inker, an influential inker, a towering figure, but he's overpowering. A few artists have had the bravery to come forward and say, hold on. But John Mishima, actually, who had worked with him more than almost anybody, he actually said the same thing. You know, he didn't want him inking a Silver Surfer. He wanted to put more of himself into it. So he got his brother Sal Buscema to embellish it, and he really liked that, and that helped break Sal to a different level and eventually go from inker to penciler and inker. But as far as Englehart on West Coast Avengers, he had an issue where he guest starred ex-Avenger Hellcat, Patsy Walker, and ex-Defender, and her husband, Daimon Hellstrom. And he had a kind of a variation on his original, you know, classic, if you want to call it, you know, costume, which always has been one of my favorites. Back then, bare-chested, half-naked male characters was really the thing. Kazar, Submariner, the Hulk, Son of Satan, you know, Man Bull, you know, I mean, there's all kinds of them, you know, and Conan, and it's like, I don't know, no one thought anything of it. Commandy, I maybe it was part of the time, I don't know. I loved it, and I'm not gay or appreciating the homoerotic implications, but I will say that if I were, I'd be like, oh wow, you know, and so it's pretty cool. Mainly the bare chest and the pentagram on his chest, which is like a brand, a mark. It's kind of like a birthmark in the comic books originally. Uh, just unforgettable design. That's the one design element besides his trident that has remained consistent through all his different incarnations and looks. So in this comic, he had this similar look, but more of a superhero. He had like a mask and called himself Hellstorm. And he didn't have his Hellfire trident anymore. He had this little weak little small trident. It's about that big that he sat with. So sometimes Englehart wasn't on the money. Sometimes he got silly, you know, on the West Coast. You know, he had done so much great work in the past. And then his work in DC, he managed to balance the superhero conventions with some really grounded characterization and interesting plots on his run on Green Lantern. That's still, I think, the best Green Lantern run, Hal Jordan Green Lantern run ever, next to the Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams. I loved the Englehart Staten Green Lantern. But he went right off that into back into Marvel and did Steve Englehart. Steve Englehart did West Coast Avengers. He also did the second Vision and Scarlet Witch miniseries, and quite a lot of his ideas from that miniseries are adapted straight into the WandaVision series. And I've talked about all that on the WandaVision video. So Englehart, of course, Englehart is the one who married off Vision and Scarlet Witch. Another really important guy. Another important, really important artist of the 70s, like Gerber, McGregor, Minch. Minch wrote Shang-Chi's Greatest Adventures, and of course Moon Knight. He created Moon Knight, who's about to have a series. So they're the fruits of their labor, and I call it labor only because it was work for hire and they got screwed. But it was really passionate creations, creating, and it's finally uh, risen to the surface of the dominant culture, and I'm happy about that. It means a lot to me, even though it is fueled and driven by major corporations as far as its distribution and marketing, Marvel and Disney. Uh, Kevin Feige has managed to keep the essence remaining of most of these properties, and we've talked about that in other videos too. So I won't go on about that, but I will get to that when I get to the Hellstrom TV show. So now I just want to say real quick, I haven't seen the Shang-Chi movie, so I don't know if I'm going to get that kind of feeling, that frisson, like, oh wow, I feel it as Shang-Chi. I don't get that feeling from any of the trailers. I'm trying to just go in and enjoy it on its own terms, and enjoy the Mandarin part, and especially Tony Leung, my favorite actor, being in it. But Hellstrom, we'll get to that. So bouncing off this Hellstorm idea of him as a superhero is kind of stupid. And then came the 90s, and Marvel was infested with what I call the image crowd. They had not found an image yet. They began at Marvel, but Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Valentino, Dan Panosian, Jim Lee. Jim Lee was probably the one of those who actually could draw the best, and wasn't the most cartoonishly comical. I don't know cartoonishness. I mean, obviously, like I said, I liked Mike Ploog. Jack Kirby is a brilliant cartoonist. But they don't have to. You don't have to be a brilliant illustrator like Alex Raymond on Flash Gordon, or some of the artists like the Filipino wave on the black and white comics. And I'm getting to that, by the way. However, some of that made its way into Daimon's next series, because Daimon's new series was called Hellstorm, Prince of Lies, and it was launched in early 1993. I used to go and hang out at a place called Avondale Pharmacy that was near the bus stop after I got off work washing dishes at a health food store back in 1993. And I was in my early 20s, and I was exhausted and lived by myself, and had a really great girlfriend at the time, though, who helped me and supported me, my friend Jeremy Horn. Jeremy Horn, ladies and gentlemen, he'll never watch this video, but I am friends with him on Facebook. I don't really talk much. He lived with me at the time. I had a good support system of friends. 1993 was a pretty decent year. Did some good music, made some good music that year. But early in that year, I was working at this place, and I'd walk a few blocks to Avondale to wait for the bus down the street. And I grew up going to Avondale in the early 1970s. I mean, I was an infant practically. I saw these racks of comic books, and this is the 70s, and the layout of the covers was different, and that stuff imprinted on me. Stuff like the first appearance of Ghost Rider, or the issue I got, or my very first issues that my mom bought me, a Fantastic Four and Spider-Man. I purchased there, or they purchased for me there, and I would just pour over those comics. Werewolf by Night was another odd one I was curious about, and I got this issue, and it was drawn by Tom Sutton, and the art was just frightening and claustrophobic and atmospheric, and I never forgot it. And now that I have the Essential Marvel, the Essential Werewolf by Night, the Marvel Essentials collection, I kind of marvel over pardon the pun, over how great that artwork is, and how now it just fits right into the groove, kind of stuff I like. So I'd go to Avondale, and so I'd come full circle, and I saw on the stand a book, and I'm going to show this to you. This is called Hellstorm. Can you see that? This light glare is really crappy. Hellstorm, Prince of Lies. He's back, and there's hell to pay. This is the back cover. This looks like some of the stuff I was drawing in the 2000s. That was just that period, Dig the vellum kind of gold vellum cover. pretty snazzy, the embossed. And I'm thinking, Marvel trying to say there was something special to this book, even though it wasn't an X-Men book or a book by one of the Image Boys, or their many um, proteges. I was a little floored. Uh, I had all but completely finished collecting Marvel. I think I still, that around that time period, I bought my last Doctor Strange issues because he was, my favorite Marvel character, and Roy Thomas was writing a pretty good run on it. And this was only a few months after I met Roy Thomas for the first time, like I mentioned earlier. Um, this artist is Michael Baer, and he started in the early 80s with, I believe, Pacific Comics. Uh, he did a book called Aztec Ace with Doug Minch. Really cool book. My buddy Derek, who was really into the indie comics of the 80s at the time, like American Flag and a lot of the black and white books, he got me into some of that stuff, and uh, really great, a really great era. Another, nostalgic thing. Um, so Michael Baer did art for Roy Thomas. He did art for Roy Thomas after Aztec Ace. He worked on the Earth 2 JSA, Justice Society of America books. He worked some on America versus the JSA. He worked on quite a bit of Infinity Incorporated and some on Young All Stars. I loved his work. I thought he was the finest artist, Roy was working with in that period. Young All Stars, the art game, really went way up over the Infinity Inc. and All Star Squadron game. The art in those books was very inconsistent, very. Infinity Inc. near the end was getting great because Michael Baer, who is Mike Hernandez, same guy. But the only great, All Star Squadron artist, in my opinion, well, after Rich Buckler, who co-created and launched it, was Jerry Ordway, who began inking it and then took over penciling and inking it. And he also launched Infinity Inc. So, yeah, Ordway was great. He came out of nowhere. He's fantastic. But after Ordway, Roy worked with a lot of other artists and on All Star Squadron, and the majority of them I didn't care for that much. Not to slag any of them. Some of them are nice, cool guys. I've met one or two of them at conventions. And then some of them filtered their way into Infinity Inc. after Ordway left and before Baer took over. The good thing about some of that period, though, is some of these weaker artists did have the great Tony DeZuniga, who was part of the Filipino wave, inking the books. So there was a nice look to it. Ironically, an artist that at that time I liked, who took over Infinity Inc., who became famous rather quick, was Todd Mcfarlane. And I met him at a Heroes signing in the store in the late 80s when he was still working on Infinity Incorporated. There was a little buzz building, but he hadn't gone over to Marvel yet to work on Hulk and then Spider-Man, where he kind of broke, and then Spawn went into the stratosphere. I've always respected Todd Mcfarlane more than I actually like his work. And as far as Spawn, I like the plots and the premise and a lot of the characters, but don't particularly like his art or writing. And even he has bowed in deference to better artists and writers to improve it. And he did the great animated show. It's just amazing with Keith David voicing Spawn. And, he did early on work with writers like Dave Sim, Frank Miller, Alan Moore. He hired them to write issues for him that he illustrated to kind of prove, that he could work with some great artists. It was a really weird period. He used to be interviewed in the Comics Journal by Gary Groth, and it would just be all this contentious stuff. And Groth would be like, is this really art? Do you really call it, this isn't blah, 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 that, and all this, heavy theory. And McFarlane would be like, come on, man, the kids dig it, but the thing is, McFarlane did have good ideas, and it wasn't just stuff like the Spawn animated series or things, but I mean, the toy, he completely revolutionized the toy and action figure lines business, and I love his work in that area. I've been an avid collector, not anymore, but So I like McFarlane as a guy, uh, but Neil Gaiman didn't, and Neil Gaiman was one of the other one who wrote an issue for him, and for that issue he co-created Angela with McFarlane. So that was a big mistake because basically McFarlane was paying these artists, these writers, great writers, to make him look good, and I thought that's all there was to it, and it was like work for hire, but Gaiman's a pretty litigious guy, and he's got a lot of power, and he was like, I want Angela, just like he wanted. He tried to get Marvel Man, Miracle Man from McFarlane, which he had acquired, and he had acquired it pretty, as far as I'm concerned, fair and square. I understand Gaiman wanting to get it because he'd been the final writer on it, but Gaiman didn't create Miracle Man. He did one run of Miracle Man, which I particularly didn't care for. Some of the art was good, not by him. But Alan Moore had entrusted the character to him. The character was owned by like several different people, like pieces, like Mark Buckingham and Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore, maybe Gary Leach, the original artist, Des Skin, the publisher, and then here comes McFarlane. It got lumped in with the Eclipse stuff and rolled over. McFarlane bought the whole thing and he owned it, and he was putting out like a nice maquette or bust of Miracle Man. And Gaiman wasn't down with it, so Gaiman won and sold the stuff back to Marvel. He probably licensed Miracle Man. So definitive reprints of Alan Moore's Miracle Man series were done by Marvel, and they're gorgeous because they were long out of print. I had all of them first run in the single issues, and a cat I had Morpheus urinated all over them. Somehow he got Miracle Man. He was climbing in my boxes, and they were in alphabetical order. He was in the M's, and it's like he missed Man Thing, but he got every Miracle Man. It was gross. I mean, it like seeped through the bags. I don't know what he was eating. It was like acid urine. So wasn't happy with Morpheus, and obviously I named him after Neil Gaiman comic character. Um, but anyway, I've gone on numerous tangents. But I am getting back to Hellstorm for a reason via this that the Vertigo books, well, DC in general, was creating an alternative to Marvel from the mid '80s on. As Marvel waned, DC got better creatively, more experimental and more experimental. They had more kind of sublines here, and you know, uh, the general it was just a different vibe. And then when the Vertigo line coalesced, I think it's in 1992, it really took off. And Sandman was kind of the flagship. The books before they were codified as Vertigo, I would say Swamp Thing was probably the preeminent title. But once it became Vertigo, Sandman by Gaiman became like the flagship title. After it ended, Garth Ennis's Creature, rightfully so, took that slot, and I eventually lost track of Vertigo as the '90s waned. But I was collecting Vertigo. They were the last mainstream comics I was collecting up to around '94ish, '95, and Marvel I'd finished in '93, like I said. Well, here's the interesting thing: is that this book in '93, at the height of my Vertigo love, reminded me of a Vertigo book. And I was like, oh my God, they're going to take the son of Satan and realize him in these terms. Just the way DC had taken Swamp Thing and Animal Man and Doom Patrol and done the same thing. And I was like, this is fantastic. So even though it wasn't like an adult book, with a warning on it like Vertigo, it was a much more adult book than most things, if not everything, being published by Marvel at the time. Much appreciated. Great art. There's Daimon. There's Death, I guess. This is Gabriel, the Devil Hunter, a character from '70s black and white Marvel magazine called Haunt of Horror. He had a handful of stories. He was a disgraced priest who became a preeminent devil hunter, like I said. He was a bit tormented. This is Patsy Walker, the Hellcat, Damon's wife. And this is Satana, Damon's sister. So before I wade into Hellstorm, I'm going to take a little diversion here and talk about Satana. So, this Satana thing, this should be a lot of fun. If not, you can turn it off anytime you want. I don't blame you. But anyway, so this book, after all the Son of Satan, look at all the Son of Satan material, is Satana. Let's get through this here. Son of Satan went on a little longer than I thought. Shoot. Okay, we're almost there. They reprint The Thing and Son of Satan. Or The Thing and Son of Satan? Yes, and The Human Torch and Son of Satan. Team up books, they teamed up with everybody. Which I always like the odd team ups, like Spider-Man and Deathlock. But check this out. This is not going to be reproduced very well, but this was an issue of Vampire Tales. This is October. I guess this book has dates. There we go. Now we can get to the. No, it doesn't have the dates. Damn you! But it's Vampire Tales #2. I would guess it's 1972, maybe late 1972. John Romita and Roy Thomas. So yes, okay. Conclusively, John Romita created Satana, the Devil's Daughter. So you have some really nice John Romita artwork. I loved his very kind of glamorous artwork. I think he was very much of his era. His covers are iconic. Of course, his Spider-Man work is world-renowned. And in these books, he did a lot of pen and ink washes for shading. The first issue of Savage Tales, he worked on an idea by Stan Lee called the Femizons, and it is amazing. I sold Savage Tales #1 recently, and I really miss it. It had the first appearance of Man-Thing, drawn by Greg Morrow. It had Conan by Barry Windsor-Smith. It had Kazar by John Buscema. It had a character called Black Brother by Denny O'Neil and Gene Colan. And it had Lee and Romita as the Femizons. It was an amazing magazine. Not a bad story, and I had it for years. Well, I had it for years and it was kind of beat up, but then I upgraded it for $80 in 2016, not long after I moved in here. And, it wasn't worth a lot then, but with the rumors flying about the Nexus of Reality and Man-Thing and all these other things coming into the MCU, it exploded, and so I took advantage of it. Some people were selling it for $1,000. I had it in great condition, and I got $700 for it. And man, I needed it. So that was the first Satana. It was just, she's a succubus. She sucks the souls. The original design, kind of simple, kind of Romita-ish. So then the Vampire Tales #3, with Morbius on the cover. Fantastic painting. Morbius is also one of my very favorites. I have this issue, the original actual magazine. I don't plan on selling that. Unless when the movie comes out and, anything of Morbius is worth like $1,000, like Man-Thing, then maybe I will. This is where the game changes with Satana. And this is what I'm talking about, where you don't just have perfunctory artists who are good storytellers, but who are idiosyncratic. They're not just cartoonists, they're illustrators. And this is Esteban Maroto, a Spanish artist. He was part of the so-called Filipino wave. They weren't all from the Philippines, but they were, mostly Spanish-speaking or named people, not characters. And, Satana is juiced up a bit. Her look is quite a bit more exotic. And he continued to riff on that. This art is lush and amazing. Dig this, man. I love the ones where she wears the goat's horns on her head. Just a gorgeously striking. Oh my god! I know I just showed you this second page. If you can't see it, no problem. But that image, I love it. And there's an article called "Everything You Always Want to Know About Satana." Here's some of other Maroto's redesigns of Romita's. Stunning. And again, around this time, they did cement continuity-wise that her name was Satana Hellstrom, and she was Daimon Hellstrom's younger uh, sister and the daughter of Satan and Daimon Hellstrom. And see, here's the Haunt of Horror. She had a story in that, and here is Gabriel the Devil Hunter. So he'll figure prominently in a couple minutes. Satana appeared in a book in a story one-off in Marvel Premiere, which I recently bought the original issue. Well, not recently, but about a year ago. And she appeared periodically. She was killed off in Marvel Team Up, which is also reprinted in that. Years later, she reappeared, and we'll get to that. But I'm going to try to still keep this in somewhat order. So we're talking about still the Hellstorm series. This is issue number 2 with Damon's good old buddy from the Defenders, Doctor Strange, on the cover. I had been rereading this whole series, and some issues I had never read all the way through, I'll admit. But I read the first 3 issues on the stands at that Avondale pharmacy. See how roundabout it, see how long it took me to tell you that? Someone reel me in. But anyway, I didn't own these until years later. And I got them for like $1.30 each. I think this was $1.30. And they're all in, 9.0 mint. So I was lucky. These books, I don't think they'll have exploded when the Hellstrom series came out because, by conventional wisdom, it bombed and it was a piece of shit. I'm going to attempt to debunk that if I ever get to part 2. So probably I'm going to have to break this into part 2 because we're up on an hour. So how about we do this? We're going to do part 2 and stagger this thing. We've covered most of the comic book career of Daimon Hellstrom and all its related topics. So next episode, I will conclude that and talk about the Hellstorm series, which is a very important series and very influential on the TV series. And then I'll get into the TV series in earnest. So I will be back with a part 2. I'm filing these, I guess, their own thing. I don't think they'll be under Blue Review because there's so much comic book material. But yeah, either way, I'll have the sub as soon as I can, but I'm probably going to go ahead and finish part 2, film it right now. So anyway, I hope you guys are doing okay. And appropriately, I'm using my devil's horns. Shout out